Oh yes, it's all a chemistry class. The reality is a chemistry class, and it's a colorful one at that. And so we're going to talk about how we can make learning colorful and interesting and exciting and step through the matrix into a world that exists beyond the matrix. So welcome to Education 2.0, ladies and gentlemen. This is the layout of the learning we're going to cover today. And Elon Musk just said, maybe we should get rid of language. And he sees us getting rid of language within the next few years. I mean, he's pretty forward thinking, but that's what I've tried to do a little bit here with using pictographs. And that's, I guess, like Egyptian hieroglyphics in some sort of way. So A, apple, we're going to talk about Y for the first section. B, bear, we're going to talk about tabula rasa. C for cat, we're going to discuss the power of lenses and why that's important. D for dog, we're going to discuss some options about reforming education and some questions that I have that I haven't been able to find answers to. And then finally, E for Egypt, we'll talk about U 2.0. So let's dive straight into this. Wayne Dyer says, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. We've been taught to see things a certain way. It's been a blessing. And now it's time to stand on the shoulders of giants, the system that we've inherited, to reach for new heights and transform the vision that we give to our kids. We live in an age of change, of innovation, of broadening perspective. Yet the giant ship of public education can take too long to change direction and empower the kids the ways they need to be. 1/3 to 1/4 of parents don't want to send their kids back to conventional school. The time is ripe to map out innovative alternatives in the formation of Us 2.0. Join us on August 1st at 11:11 a.m. Cali time at this Zoom link, where we're going to discuss Education 2.0, amongst many other fascinating topics. We'll have a brief talk by Grayson and myself, and open brainstorming about mapping out the path forward. And then we'll have a structured open discussion time in which we invite you to bring the topics you're passionate about that involve inspiration for transformation. This world is ours. The dawning of the new generation is ours to guide. Come gather with us as we collectively change the way we think. Aslan's Rainbow, inspiration for transformation.
Yeah.
Yay!
I want to see that movie.
You're in it, my friend.
Ah,
You are in it. This is our
Nice.
movie that we're mutually constructing.
nice. Yeah.
Very creative. That took a lot of thought. You put a lot of thought into that. I can tell.
You did a really good job with that, though. It was fun.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks, buddy. It's a little bit about why we're covering this stuff. Let's talk about B, the bear section, tabula rasa. Well, there's two different views about nature and nurture, and there's probably some combination of them. That's the truth. But initially, there was Aristotle in 385 BC, and I know that, Devin, you're a fan. He said that we're blank slates when we come into the world, and that's why education and the environment that we're surrounded by is so important. John Locke more recently said that, and he was the one associated with the word tabula rasa, which means blank slate. Then the alternative perspective to that, well, actually what they're saying, and I kind of get the impression, and maybe you can correct me, Devin, that Aristotle was a little bit more kind of this world based in terms of the five senses. It was what we could smell and see and taste and feel and hear. And then, but his predecessor, who he learned from, Plato, was a little more mystical and a little more higher dimensional. And him and Descartes believed in innatism, which is the nature part, that we actually come with this pre-configured set of things that we can act out. So Plato believed in the realm of ideal forms, that we have this ideal construction that's beyond this world, and we're all trying to attain to that. So he was a bit of a mystic himself with the mysteries that he partaked in. So we still have this discussion today. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it both? I mean, I've seen in psychology what kind of some of the consensus is that nature sets the ceiling upon which we can rise to, and then nurture determines how high we will get towards that ceiling. So how are we programming our kids? Are we bringing out what's already inside them, or are we just writing on them like they're blank slates? Now in C, lenses, you have something you want to say, Barry?
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk about, you just said about nature, putting a ceiling there and nurture getting us up to that ceiling. And that may have been true in the past, but now with different cerebral implants and different things we can add on to the body, I would say that nurture is going to push us past that ceiling that nature created, right? And take us into the stratosphere. Like we're going to be able to think so much faster than any human being ever was able to do, so many orders of magnitude greater that it'll seem silly the way we used to think.
That's
We will
exactly what I
leave
think
nature
happening.
in the dust. It will
Well,
be let
this is
go.
nature. We are doing this. Nature's doing this to herself. And that's actually what Elon Musk is doing, is he's creating these cerebral implants, these little devices you can put in your brain that will like fix blindness and will basically make us cyborgs. But yeah, we are really at a very exciting age in terms of transcending the limitations that we've had in the past. And what are these limitations? What are the possibilities? You said sending out into the stratosphere. Well, this right here is a picture of how important our lenses are. And bear in mind, using vision as an analogy, what we're seeing at the moment is only a tiny sliver of what there is to be seen. And as you're saying, Barry, it's pushing us beyond what's been seen before with this technology and this age that we're in. So at the top of this is that little tiny sliver of colorful light is the visible spectrum. And look how huge both the left and the right side of that are in terms of X-rays and infrared, long radio waves. And that's just what we've discovered. So we know that there's huge spectrums beyond even the visible spectrum. I believe the same is true of consciousness. And so if we're just programming kids, I'm not going to blame Aristotle, I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but with looking at the five senses, what we can see and feel, then we're teaching them that reality is not as broad as it really is. So we'll talk later a little bit about people like Rudolf Steiner, who believed that there was a lot more to this reality, and exposing kids to the possibility that that exists can really open their minds up.
By the way, what you're talking about is called materialism.
Materialism, that things are
Yeah.
just matter.
Yeah.
And we're in an age of reductive materialism where everything is tried to be boiled down to matter and atoms. But
Josh, I actually like completely disagree with everything.
that's good, dude. That's awesome, bro. So do we want to go into those disagreements now, or do you want to bring them up at the end?
Maybe at the end. Well, we can maybe just go through the presentation and then we can have the debate or discussion at the end.
That's smarter because there might be something later in his slides that you might want to address.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's do that then. So this is the left brain, right brain dichotomy, which is oversimplified, but I think most of school tries to emphasize the left brain analytical calculated side, whereas we know that color, life, creativity, we have a creative God, is equally important. And so
sorry, is everybody seeing, sorry to interrupt, is everyone seeing screens? I don't have anything except Josh's camera at the moment. Yeah, we didn't see that. There's so much in Incubus track about, there's like a bit of speech audio in the Incubus Science album about that exact thing that we don't see more than that tiny narrow band. It's amazing bit of speech sample.
And we're not really taught that. I mean, we're just taught that that little band is where we should all have our existence within. But that seems pretty limiting to me. And so what are some of the opportunities that we could teach kids instead? How can we open up some more nonlinear pathways to them? And nonlinear is one of the ways that I think life works. And so I don't think we should only be focusing on linear realities. What we could expose them to is non-duality and paradox, because that is the nature of reality too, but we're not really taught that. We're taught in math that there's one way to get there and there's one right answer and everything else is wrong. Or a lot of exams, and multiple choice. One of them has to be right and three of them have to be wrong or whatever. But that's actually not the way reality works. That the blue button is true, the red button is false. That's just a little paradoxical loop. It's an example of one of many that we find in reality. Look at the whole flat versus round earth thing. We can see that they're both true. If you can tell that the earth is flat, I mean, it clearly looks flat from the left picture, and that's our perception of it. And the earth is also round. So is the earth flat or is it round? Yes. And there's a lot of those kinds of things that I think if we open kids' minds up to, you can actually embrace paradox. You can have both and. I think that would make life a lot richer for them instead of having to fit things into boxes, which brings up division between different people groups and all sorts of things. So cooperation instead of competition. We can do it together, and we always have done it together. No one's ever conquered the world by themselves or had a revolution by themselves. And we're taught in school to be in the top of your class, which is just a competition sort of mindset. You're taught you have to beat all the job candidates when applying for work. And so that's a competition mindset. But what that does is induce fight or flight mode, and then you're not in your most creative and altruistic space. So instead of that, we could have cooperation where we're all different instrument players in this symphony called life. And so the trumpet player is not trying to like get all up on the drummer and hit the drum with his trumpet. The drum's got better sticks that he can do that, and vice versa. If we just play our instruments and harmonize our instruments, I think we can achieve more together than we can apart. Holistic outcome and learning instead of grades. So let's see if you guys can hear the audio from this 1 minute Alan Watts talk. Can you hear that? Cool.
Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Why, that's great, isn't it?" And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And he said, "Maybe." The whole process of nature is an integrated process of immense complexity, and it is really impossible to tell whether anything that happens in it is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequences of a misfortune, or you never know what will be the consequences of good fortune.
And that's that, Mr. Watts. So, I mean, we're kind of taught to stick things in categories, and we're teaching the kids that right, wrong, good, bad, but it's much more complicated than that. And I think at least exposing them to the fact that things are broader and have this mysterious way of working out can help them to see the things that happen in their life differently. For instance, in church, we're doing a little Bible series. Me and the girls make videos on Joseph. So he gets pushed into a pit by his brothers and sold off to slavery in Egypt, which seems terrible, but that leads him to become the most powerful person in the whole of Egypt and ends up saving the surrounding region of this famine. So it's much more complicated than that. I think we could teach the kids about those nuances. We could teach the kids pattern recognition instead of memorization. The inner world and the outer world, there's a symmetry between those, and the microcosm and the macrocosm, there's a reflection and alignment. If we can notice certain patterns and apply those to nature, we're better equipped to actually use those patterns. Oh, Mike is here. Welcome, dude.
So,
What's up, bro? We're talking about microcosm versus macrocosm. Yeah, welcome to the gathering, bro. So I think you'll dig this as well, Micah. This is how the inner world and the outer world, there's an alignment between the two, and the microcosm, the very small, is a reflection of the macrocosm. So we're talking about education 2.0 and how we could teach the kids to look for patterns. And the reason why we would look for how the cells interact in biology is because that same pattern affects our life on larger levels too. The reason why we look at cosmology and the size of the planets and how that works is because we can see those patterns right here in my room. So we could teach the kids to apply those instead of just memorizing particular formulas that they need to. We could teach them innovation instead of repetition. This is a time when it's the innovative people who are rising hugely above. Think about companies like Uber. They put together dots that were already there and they just linked them. There was the ability to access GPS on phones, and there were personal cars. Put those together, multi-million, if not billion-dollar company. So I think that the time of trying to repeat what's been done already is not really serving our kids really well. What we should teach them is innovating and taking what's already been done and joining those dots in new ways. We should teach them social intelligence and mental health instead of IQ. I think schools are a lot focused on the CPU of our brains, the processing speed and the ability to achieve tasks, which is a lot of what IQ measures. But Einstein said that EQ, emotional intelligence, is more important than IQ, which is that kind of CPU processing. So we need to learn how to relate to people and what we are and what our minds are and how other minds work. And I think that's what leads to thriving and success and overall happiness. We can teach kids new forms of language. I already touched on the pictographs and the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and we already do that. Like one emoticon is worth 1,000 words. And so we could move away. We're already abbreviating words. We're changing language. We can move away from even that type of written language into something that's more like a pictograph, but more sophisticated, which I think is already happening. Practicality instead of the theoretical. So instead of teaching the kids rote math, set them loose on the stock market, paper trading, and let them learn how the graphs work and how the math adds up and how they can make themselves cash, because then they'll make themselves cash. Then they'll learn to get good at that. It teaches them the same math, and they'll be able to provide themselves income that will liberate them from having to stick in any kind of box, and they can make our parents' income too. Health optimization instead of biology. Well, why learn about the cells and stuff? All of that's going to be applied in the context of, well, how does this help us to be optimally functioning physical beings? Leverage instead of trigonometry. The point that you can use social leverage, you can use financial leverage, you can use physical leverage to lift things that are beyond you. That's what we were talking about the power of collaboration. Instead of trigonometry, like I've never, not once in my life, used trigonometry after I left school. I think it's cool because it probably forms your mind in certain ways. That's cool, but I should have been told that that's why I was learning it, so that it forms my mind in ways that relate to reality. And we could teach kids to pass the GED instead of identifying with the curriculum. So the goal of some of these subjects is just, you're going to pass the exam. I think that if we're going to develop alternative education systems, they still need to have at least what other people who go through the conventional systems have, which is basically a GED. So they got to get that same piece of paper, but we could be starting at age 7 and teach them how to pass that GED exam. And then they got exactly what the others have, but much more. So let's move on to the second last section, which is D for dog, options and questions. I know that Stephen's interested in Rudolf Steiner. And he has a Waldorf system of education, which is huge in Cape Town, where I'm from. A lot of our friends went to the Waldorf system. And so he lived in the last century, and he was a visionary and a mystic. And he said, to be free is to be capable of thinking one's own thoughts, not the thoughts merely of the body or of society, but thoughts generated by one's deepest, most original, most essential and spiritual self, one's individuality. And so we can see there's Waldorf schools all across the world. And that graph at the bottom there is the rise of Waldorf schools, and that's getting pretty exponential. And so that's because he recognizes the power of creativity and of multidimensionality. So he was an interesting character, and it's not all in his education system, but he believed in the realm of gnomes and other beings and larger consciousness, mystical experience, all that kind of stuff. And he applied that through mathematics and art to allow the kids to figure out things their own way and not force reading on them too quick, just let them explore. And so maybe we could take some of the good aspects of his education system and ditch the rest and formulate something of our own. What are some of these options that we could do? Well, already with the COVID situation, it's very uncertain about whether the kids are going to be going back to school. If they are they all going to be wearing masks? California's got a good system of homeschooling where people alternate between different families' houses, and each family specializes in one particular niche. And so they create different learning environments that they could go deep into a topic, and they get to alternate the kids around so that we're not just, I don't think it's good to necessarily always have your kids and be the ones having to force them to learn. system of different families, and we could set these things up, as well as working in nature. In Hawaii, there's a nature school, a bus that carries kids around, and all they do is go and learn in nature. I think we could really use some of those components. And what about technology? I mean, now I already heard that my niece is going to be doing the whole of next year on Zoom for her school. So, well, we've been doing this for a long time. So we've got a little bit more innovation because we know what's already been done. What about those mutual whiteboards that we do? What about some of these poll activities? How can we be on the forefront of that digital education? And how can we combine that with the global culture that we have in this room with all the different continents? So these are some of my questions. I don't know whether you have to have taken any formal school to be qualified to write the GED exam. I'd be very interested to know that. I tried to look it up and I couldn't find it. Do you have to have done a certain amount of conventional school and then you can write the GED exam, or anyone can just walk in there and write it?
Do you mean the latter? Do you mean take the exam?
Yeah.
Oh.
Because, dude, imagine that. Imagine you don't have to have done any formal schooling.
No, you don't.
You
don't have to have any formal schooling.
Well, bro, I'm just going to teach my daughters how to pass the GED like now.
There's a lot of people that do
whatever
that.
They want.
There's a lot of people that do that.
See, that's good news, man. That's really good news, because we can give them the exact qualification that their fellows in school will have, except we've got 12 years that we can formulate them in much broader ways. So that, if that's the truth, then that's great.
That's what homeschooling is. That's what homeschooling does, is prepare them for a GED exam.
Yeah. So then that's
stand for something like
hated formal school, so and he, I guess, would approve that wholeheartedly.
Who's that?
Einstein. He hated formal schooling.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Ooh.
I missed what GED stands for. Is it General Education Doctorate or something like that?
It's something like that. It's like the high school exam in America.
Okay. Oh, so everybody has to do it.
No. If you are in a public high school, you do not take the GED. When you graduate high school, you have a high school diploma. If you cannot go to high school, you take the GED exam. And if you pass that exam, you get the equivalent of a high school diploma.
Okay.
Right. 100% right, Barry. 100% right.
So that's looking pretty positive. We got a lot that we could work with there. And then the question is, well, would the state fund this kind of stuff? Now, if they're closing down schools, there's got to be a lot of allocated funding that we could start to tap into to implement some of these programs. Third question is, how do we set up a global virtual classroom using virtual reality and augmented reality to create cultural synergy? Like some of the cultural synergy that we got at these Aslan's Rainbow gatherings, different cultures bring different lenses. And if the kids are learning with people from diverse cultures, it's becoming a global community anyway. I think that would set them ahead. And then 4 is, what's the next step? What do we do? And so I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about it, both here and on the website. And I'll talk a little bit about where to access that on the website in this last section. So the last one, you 2.0. This whole education thing is existential. This is us 2.0. It's the next generation. And it might not even be just a theoretical, we live on through our kids. We might literally be our kids. We might be the next generation. The Gaia hypothesis says that the earth is one giant organism, just like we're a collection of different communities of cells. Well, the earth is thinking us. And so, Barry, when you were saying that we're transcending nature, well, this is nature transcending herself. And so the next generation of kids and what we're allowing them to think and the heights they can achieve, that's literally us. That is us. And so Karl Rahner was a famous Catholic theologian who was very prominent. He was involved in setting up Vatican II and that huge council that happened in the 60s. And he believed that after death, we become pan-cosmic. We become integrated with nature herself. There's the movie Lucy. This is, Facebook filtered this out in my last live stream, but I show a clip from the movie Lucy, how she's maximizing her brain potential. When she gets to 100%, she disintegrates basically, and she becomes everywhere. And then she's saying, I'm everywhere on the cell phones, and she's the data itself. This could be a way of framing what happened with Jesus. When he died, he was able to become the very operating system of reality. He reset reality and it rebooted. That's why the sun went dark and it next leveled. So when we die, we live on through what's happening after us. And then finally, this is very true in the biblical legacy. That's why when people like Moses and Abraham were given promises, it wasn't even necessarily for them. It's that their kids were going to inherit the land. It's like in our day of individualism, that seems like a raw deal. It's like, your kids are going to live great, happy lives in the promised land, but you're going to die in the desert, which they both did. They died in the desert. But they understood that who they were transcended their individuality, and they actually lived on literally through their kids. So this is the last slide here. How do we go about doing this? Well, we've always had the Wisdom School on the Aslan's Rainbow website. And a couple of months ago, I put in a new section, Kids 2.0. And if you go to that, there's a little kind of choose your own adventure thing you can follow, but also there's a form where you can submit your ideas and your thoughts. And I'm going to be posting that out because now everyone can access that through the internet, and together we can construct what the next level of us is going to look like. So let's learn together, everybody. And that rounds up my presentation. What are your guys' thoughts?